Hey everyone, it's Justine and welcome back to the 12 Days of Christmas. Today is day 6 and I'm featuring layering stamps from the ton. I'm going to create 2 separate cards and there's a really big giveaway at the end, so be sure to stay tuned until the end of the video. So to get started, I am going to be doing my layering stamping. And I'm going to be using the Misti so that I can do a corner-to-corner technique. This way, I'm able to just flip over my panel and get the exact same image on 2 opposite corners. I'm going to be starting out with the branch die, and I'm going to be using the Aspen Cocoa Brown color from the ton. I'm using their mini inks throughout the entire video today, and they're really, really great. I love the color variety in them. They're so fantastic. So I'm going to be stamping this on both corners. So in order to do that, I simply need to turn it over, and then I stamp on the other corner. And so I'm going to create 2 of these holly branches in both corners, and they're going to be identical, and I don't have to remove the stamp each time. Next up, I'm going to be stamping the outline, and I'm going to be stamping this in the darkest of the green color, Basil Mojito. And I'm going to actually stamp the outline as well as the 3rd layer in this exact color. So I'm going to go ahead and line those up, and it's super easy to line up Effie's stamps from the ton because they always have a very distinct feature about them, and once you find that distinct feature, it's easy to line them up. So this branch is really not difficult. So I'm going ahead, stamping it down, and then twisting around my cardstock and stamping it again. Once again, it's super easy to do because they're identical in both corners. Now I'm going to speed you up for the rest of the stamping here since I think you get the picture, and we're going to be stamping the rest of the layers. Now if these outlines don't turn out perfect, it's not a big deal at all because you're going to be stamping this solid piece in the middle. I'm going to be using the deep emerald green and stamping those down to create a solid pattern. And I'm able to stamp twice as well because I'm using the Misti in order to deepen up the color. The last part is adding the berries and then the final leaf stamp. So I'm going ahead again with that Basil Mojito and just adding that small detail of the middle of the leaves before moving on to the cranberries, or the berries, whatever they are. Anyway, I'm going on and I'm using some red sangria ink to stamp these, and then I'm going in with some lipstick red for the darkest color. It's kind of just a simple half moon on each of the cherries just to add a little bit of depth. So now I'm finished creating these beautiful layers and I haven't had to do a single bit of coloring. Super easy and fun. Now I'm going to take the brushed Mary stamp and I am going to be stamping the Mary onto another sheet of white paper. Now what's really cool is Effie is actually giving away from the ton the 3 stamp sets I'm using in this video. So I'm giving away the Holly Branch set, I'm giving away this brushed Mary, and I am giving away the one that I'm going to be using in the second card, and that is a wreath builder. So be sure to enter the giveaway by leaving a comment here on YouTube or heading to my blog for bonus entries. So I'm going to be inking this up here using some Versamark ink, and I'm going to be embossing it using some gold embossing powder. So what I simply did was poured the embossing powder on top, it stuck to the Versamark ink, and then I went ahead with my heat tool and melted the embossing powder to get the shiny gold. Now I cut it out because I fussy cut, however there is a die available and I will link to that below in the video description if you'd like to get your hands on the matching die, and so you don't have to fussy cut this at all. And I'm just going to use my Tombow Mono liquid adhesive and I'm going to add that onto all the areas of this brushed Mary and stick it into the middle of my card. Now I'm just going to work on some of the finishing touches. So I have everything down here. I'm going to go ahead and stamp Christmas. Just a very plain Christmas stamp with black ink here is all I think that it needs. And I think just adding that very subtle sentiment at the bottom is more than enough because that Mary and these holly branches really do stick out and they're really the feature point of the card. I'm going to go ahead and grab my card panel now and attach it to a card base. My card base measures 8.5 by 5.5 and it's folded in the middle at 4.25 inches to make a top folding landscape card. And I'm going ahead and I am putting this down onto the card. Then the last step really is just to add a couple of embellishments here, and I'm going to be using some Nuvo drops. I'm going to be using autumn red, gold, as well as green in order to match all of the colors on this card. So I like to do them in triangles because that is what is most appealing to the eye, and I'm doing them in all 3 colors on this one actually. And there are a couple of different golds available, so I'll make sure to link to the proper gold that matches the embossing powder in the description. So I hope you enjoyed the first card. We're going to move on to the second card now, which is also a layering stamp video. And since you already know all about layering stamping now, I'm going to speed up the video for time purposes. So I'm going to be stamping this wreath in some deep emerald green, and I am going to be then stamping the second layer on it using the deep mojito, or the mojito green. Basil mojito is what it's called. And the second layer here actually really just beefs up the leaves a little bit, gives them a little bit more texture, and they look absolutely gorgeous. And once again, these leaves are actually set in a couple of different ways, so you're actually able to line up the stamp really, really easily. So if you notice at the top of my leaves here, there are 3 that are kind of in a row sticking up, and that's where the layering is going to happen when you line up the little middles of the branches. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and stamp a first layer of the pine cones in some of the brown color that I used in the beginning of the first card as well. So I'm just stamping them kind of randomly all over the wreath. There's no rhyme or reason really, but I want them to face in different directions so they look a little bit different as I go along. Now I'm just going to simply take this and just zap it with my heat gun to make sure all the ink is dry, because I'm going to be doing some embossing and I don't want the embossing powder sticking. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up the leaves here, and these are the centers, and then I'm going to take the second layer of the pine cone and stamping in Versamark ink for all of these. I'm going to go ahead and stamp that layer on there so that I can actually add some copper embossing powder. It's going to look really gorgeous. This is one of my favorite embossing powders because of its color. So I'm going to grab a scrap piece of computer paper, and I'm going to grab some copper embossing powder in fine detail, and I'm just going to go over those there, and it's going to stick on top of the pine cones as well as in the center of the leaves, so they kind of look like branches. I'm going to grab my heat gun now, and I'm going to melt all of this, and it's going to look absolutely stunning when it's all finished. So once my entire wreath is done, I actually didn't like it so much in the area that it was, so I wanted to move it onto the center of a top folding card. So I went ahead and I stamped my sentiment in just some black ink that have a Holly Jolly Christmas, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually die cut the wreath using a circle die, because once again I don't like it being in this landscape format. So I'm going to be using a stitch circle die, and this die just barely fits, but it worked really well. I think having that close proximity worked nicely. Now, in my opinion, no wreath is really complete without a bow, so I wanted to add the layering dies on this bow. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I love the way that it turned out. So I used the lightest color red, or one of the lighter color reds that I own, and then I went ahead and added the second layer. And both the second and the third layer I actually did in the same color. I find that that actually turned out really nicely also. And so that's all done. It gives it that beautiful depth. It makes it look so realistic. And I just cut it out by hand actually, and stuck it then using some 3D foam tape on the bottom so that it would stick to the wreath on top. That was also stuck using 3D foam tape. So just to make sure that it was sitting on the same level. And I stuck that in the middle there and pretty much called it a day. All that was left to do was simply mount it to a card base. It's a top folding card that measures 11 by 4 1/4 inches and folded at the 5 1/2 inch point. And that is the end of today's card tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed the 2 layering stamped cards. Don't forget to leave a comment on this video and go check out the bonus entries you can get on my blog, because these 3 stamps are an amazing giveaway. Thank you so much for the Ton Stamps for sponsoring this. You can go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you're interested at all, or you can go ahead and click to go to the next video or the previous videos that I've actually created for this series. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow for another card idea.